I think the most interesting topic. All right, well, why don't you kick us off, Andrew, and let's just get into it.
The one thing that I wanted to talk about was, Jesse, I know your schedule. It's super backed up. Why do you want to do a podcast now? Why do you want to start this off?
Oh man, it's a great question. I think there's a few reasons. I think the number one reason is I've been on a really interesting journey with Dave over the last 7 or 8 years, and it's changed my life, and it's changed my family's life, and it's changed everyone I work with's life. And I want to share it more broadly. And I think I meet entrepreneurs every day on social and in our accelerators who are where I was in 2017 when I first met Dave, or earlier than that. And I go, man, I want Dave and me. I want this story to be out there. I want people to have this content in the world. And Dave and I are a magical pairing. And so I think when we do this together, but it's in a broader context, it'll be really powerful. And I want that to exist. So that's number one. Number
Hmm.
two is I love Dave, and I just don't have time to talk to him. So that's always a bonus. And number three kind of relates to number one, but I think Dave is like the next Tony Robbins. And so I want the world to know, I want them to see what I see.
Dave, what about you? What are we trying to do here for you?
Well, first, I'm just touched by hearing you say that, Jesse. I love you too. And I'm excited to spend any time we get to spend together. And I appreciate what you see in me and helps me see myself more expansively. So thank you. For me, I love supporting entrepreneurs. I think there's such bravery and courage in stepping into that arena of creating something from nothing. And it's really challenging. And, my view is that the startup is one of the best personal and spiritual growth dojos on the planet. And that's not the experience or the way most entrepreneurs are experiencing it. So I feel really excited to help create a context where the startup experience becomes this profound personal and spiritual growth journey and to
Because,
support that.
sorry, instead of seeing it as a dojo, most entrepreneurs see it as what? Instead of seeing it as a practice exercise room to get better?
As a whipping room,
Say again, Jesse?
a whipping room, a way to beat themselves up. And
Roller coasters, good metaphor. I think I'll do
I
my
like the whipping room, honestly. Whenever Jesse talks about other entrepreneurs who want to beat themselves up and operate off of fear, I love it because I feel heard and seen for the first time. Popular television doesn't get me. Other people, when they talk about their vision for changing the world, I get that for sure. But when he goes, they operate out of a whipping room, I love that. In my head, I go, yes, that's in my head all the time. Whipping room, that's a good phrase. He nailed it. He knows me so well.
I want to go do something that's going to make me feel worse about myself.
Because it's going to make me want to do even better. Because if I whip myself, then I'm going to finally get to run faster than anyone else can imagine. And do not take that away from me.
I think the other thing that Dave and I have talked about a lot over text is I don't think there's anything like what we have for the vision of this show. And the vision for this show is there's a lot of leaders who are starting with their hearts or starting with people, many of whom worked with somebody like Dave or Dave himself. And I think showcasing that as a way to do it. When I started Gateway X, I wanted to prove to myself that you could be ambitious and do it from heart and do it from love and do it from positive, like an uplifting way. And I think the path out there of starting an Amazon or an Uber where you beat people up to get really successful is very well worn. That's an easy, it's so well worn that all of us think that's the way we have to do it. And I think this other path is just not well worn. It doesn't have the same sort of reputation. And I think this is the beginnings of creating that for people.
Dave, is it because it just doesn't work? Like maybe it's really nice and it's soothing for rich people like Jesse who could afford to have love in their lives, or for people who are looking for a calmer, less successful life. Is there an example of somebody who is loving, doesn't whip themselves in their brains, doesn't whip their people, who's still doing well?
Gratefully, yes. First, let me just riff off what Jesse's pointing to. I think most leaders, most entrepreneurs motivate themselves from fear and lack. What I've been calling dirty fuel. And this idea that I could let go of the fear and lack and still be motivated is kind of a new idea. I ask clients, like, are you willing to accept yourself and your startup for being exactly as you are? And it is. And they're like, absolutely not. That's crazy. Then what would motivate me to do anything? And that's sort of the default context that most founders and leaders and business people are in. And so this idea that there's this other way to motivate yourself and your people is pretty novel for most people, most
Well,
founders.
let's go
Go
back to
ahead.
2019. And Dave, you may or may not remember this, 'cause I'm sure you have this conversation with a lot of people, but I was the person Dave was talking about. And I was like, dude, if I don't create bigger goals for myself, if I don't tell myself something's broken in this moment, how do I get to the next level? That's exactly what I do. Like, and you say this to me today, Andrew. And Dave, he took it in an interesting direction. He said, really? You really think that's what happened? And I was like, he's like, what are you afraid is going to happen if you don't have those things? I was like, I'm going to watch Netflix all day. I'm going to go to Vegas and just gamble like an idiot. I'm going to, I'm just going to do nothing. And he was like, all right, let's try it. So, he asked my wife for permission for me to go to Vegas and to do Netflix and not watch the kids and everything. And I just did nothing for like a while. And honestly, by day 5 or 6, what happened? I got calmed down a little bit. I enjoyed it. I had my fun. And then I was like, ooh, I have a cool idea. Like, this would be a cool thing in the world. I want to go do this. Like, this would be fun. And what ended up happening for me, and then we came back as we did, and Dave was like, did you really think that the creative energy that's inside of you, Jesse, would just disappear when you stopped giving yourself these, negative forms of
Stop whipping
motivation?
yourself.
When I stopped whipping myself. And my answer was yes, I actually did. And so it was actually valuable to prove to myself that wouldn't happen when I actually let into what the fear was that I had. And instead I was like, oh, so there's this other part of me, this creative guy inside of me who wants to build things and enjoys that. And it became the beginnings of the flip for me, which was that I can use this other energy, this like clean fuel, as to use Dave's analogy, to motivate myself. But that was like probably 2-3 years into coaching. And then even that specific experiment, which was a really important experiment to be able to prove to myself that what my fear of letting go of whipping myself was not going to actually come true. But Andrew
Yeah.
asked for someone, Dave, who's the best entrepreneur who you feel like is motivated by,
The Well, I have a client coming to my mind, Wes Schroll, who runs Fetch. They're, I think, on a tear, kind of the unicorn startup that many, many others would like to be, or like to emulate. And we've been working together for a while. And there's no perfection, right? But he's really committed to being a conscious leader, and he's grown tremendously. And he's really shifted from motivating the team from fear. So just to be practical, hey guys, if we don't get this right, this bad thing is going to happen, right? We're not going to be able to raise the next round, right? That was his MO, as is many entrepreneurs, to motivating them from vision and inspiration. Hey, if we do get this right, here's how these amazing things that are going to happen, and we're going to be able to serve all these people. And like, I've seen just a dramatic shift in that, and the entire culture is uplifted. People are excited. And I love the word you used, Jesse, creative energy. Like, the level of creative energy is really sort of been unleashed. And they were coming up with new idea. I mean, they came up with a new idea that literally doubled their business overnight, right? And those are the kind of things that are not in the local maximum that we can hustle our way to, right? They only happen when we're in this sort of more expansive, present, creative mode. So that's a great example.
Yeah, I mean, I had an interesting,
Go ahead.
Dave, I had an interesting experience. You may remember this because I started working with Dave because of this deal that had not gone as well as I wanted to. But interestingly, the guy who invested, his company, Rick at Red Ventures, he's another example of a multi-billionaire who is motivated to help people. He's home for his family every day. He never loses perspective. I mean, he's a human, so I'm sure he deals with fear and below the line all the time. But in general, Andrew, like, he took 20 years to build Red Ventures to a, $20 billion company, by the way. And then that might be part of this, which is it might not happen as fast, or there may be other trade-offs that you have to make. But he's another example in me who he is genuinely motivated to help the people around him to do things more creatively, to be motivated by the clean fuel, not the dirty fuel. And by the way, I got lucky for, talk about the universe, because I had Dave coaching me By the way, Ampush did not get any more valuable for 5 years from the time these guys invested to the time we sold it. And the old Jesse would have been like, that's the worst thing that could have ever happened to you. And in many ways, I had Dave coaching me, and I had Rick as an example for this. And those two things really conspired to help me open up my eyes. And if nothing else, man, I'm happier and more peaceful. And I think that is worth a lot.
Okay.
And
all right. And
you
I
sold
do see your
Ampush.
point, by the way, when you bring up Rick, the reason I see your point, sorry to interrupt, Dave, is because he's not someone who's talking about this much. And there are others like him who are doing this, who are living this, who are not talking much. And I guess the mission you're both coming to this with is, how do we talk about our experience here and then see if we can talk about others and ideally bring them on here and have them talk openly about their experiences, so that when we think about entrepreneurial go-getterness, we don't only think about Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, but we have other models. And if nothing else, we've expanded our menu. What were you going to say, Dave?
I had a mentor who said, consider the most successful business people are either the ones with the most fear or the most love. It's extremes. And because human beings are wired for fear, that's more of our default. That's much more natural, right? And so that's, I think, partly why we see more examples of that. It actually takes way, way more energy and intention to overcome our default, wiring toward threat and fear and operate from a place of love and presence. And even just saying that word, like I noticed a little, just a twinge of reticence, like, oh, are we allowed to talk about love, in business and startups? Like, what are people going to think of that, right? And how crazy is that? I think it might be the most common word in human, language, or at least in music. And we all want to love and be loved. And yet somehow it's like a bad word in business.
And if you get any founder alone in a quiet moment, none of them, very few of them go, I want fear, right? So what they would say is, I think I need the fear to be successful. That's why I'm using fear, because I think I need it to be successful because of the story, because of the examples of, you have to beat everyone up in order to be. And human history is that's how government started. That's how historical civilizations work. With fear, fear, fear. But if you go to someone and you go, wait, so you don't want it. Andrew, you're a great example. You don't want it. You have 3 beautiful children. You have a very comfortable life. And you're like, dude, I want to feel peace. And I also want to be successful. Right? I want both those things, but I just don't believe that's possible. Yeah. And therefore I shall choose fear.
Yeah. It is possible.
I literally inhaled to disagree with Jesse until he made that the rest of the point. And I go, okay, all right, so let's take this into a specific situation. Jesse, you walked in here saying that something bad is going on with your office and that you are somehow tilted or impacted by it. What happened? And let's see if you and Dave could talk through it the way that you would if you were in private.
I mean, I could talk about it, and maybe it's an example of the results of Dave and my work together. I think I was 10 minutes late to this call, to this pod for our first ever recording, because I've subleased a space in St. Louis from some company that's gone under and gone dark. They've just disappeared from the face of the earth. And the landlord called me, and it's a father and a son, and the son is like my age, and he's like, we want to figure out a good solution. The dad is this old real estate guy. He's like, I want to be heard. Let me be heard. You can't stay in that space another day. You need to be out tomorrow. You need to be out Monday. And I felt anger. I felt a charge come through me. And I was like, who the fuck does this guy think he is? And felt all the thoughts. And I took a breath, which I probably wouldn't. I might have exploded on this guy or gone and lawyered up and whatever. And I just kind of took a breath and I said, listen, I'm trying to be a good player here. I'm trying to be a good actor here, but I don't appreciate the way you're speaking to me right now. If you're telling me I need to move out of space quickly, I will. But I'll talk to my attorneys also, and I'll do this in a way that's going to work for everyone. But I'm not going to be intimidated, and I'm not going to be, and I don't appreciate the way you're speaking to me. And his dad is, he kind of you could feel him lay off. I imagine the dad and son are on the phone, and the son says, "Go away." He goes, "Hey, we don't want to be hostile, Jesse. We're not trying to." Okay, and then the son is saying these things. We don't want to be hostile. You've been helpful, and the situation sort of got resolved. Now I think we need to move out quickly, and I don't feel fear around that. But there was a moment there where I think fear, anger, ego would have taken me over, and might have led me to go, well, I'm going to show this guy and I'm going to go spend money on lawyers, and I have a sublease. Look at my document. And I've been in much more, frustrating situations like that. But that one, I think what I would describe it as is like, I felt my anger through as it was coming to some degree. And I was candid and I spoke for my truth. I didn't hold it back, and I didn't make it personal either. I didn't speak about, what Dave and I would call unarguable language. I said, I don't appreciate the way you're speaking to me. I don't like it. I'm going to be helpful. But I didn't say, you're to be, whatever. It just didn't go off
You
the
shouldn't
handles.
speak to me that way would be an
Don't speak to me,
arguable
but
way.
who do you think you are? How dare you speak to me that way? Or you shouldn't speak to me that way. Be like, well, I'll talk to you this way. And then they kind of calmed down and said, we're sorry. We're really frustrated. We're getting, we've lost $500,000 on this. I totally get it, guys. I want to help you. I don't want you to be frustrated either. I'm sympathetic to you. And I'm going to need 30 to 60 days to move out. I'm not going to move out tomorrow. Sorry. Right. And they didn't agree because they're not going to agree, but they kind of agreed. Right. They're not going
I
to
love
let
that.
you.
Why'd you say, Dave, that you shouldn't, or what's the difference in the language that
Oh,
he used?
so most people speak in a way that's arguable, like they share the thoughts that are arising in their mind as if they're the truth. So you might have the thought, he shouldn't speak to me that way. And then you might verbalize it, you shouldn't speak to people that way, or you shouldn't speak to me that way. And that's not true. Like, who knows how someone else should or shouldn't speak. So when you state your thoughts, or sometimes I'll say your stories, the stories that your mind makes up as if they're true, that's speaking arguably, and it creates argument, because then he's going to feel attacked and say, well, I'll speak to you how I damn well please, or as opposed to speaking unarguably is simply revealing the thoughts and feelings and wants as they're arising. So in Jesse's example, I don't want to be spoken to that way. I don't appreciate it. That's just a reveal. It's unarguable that Jesse doesn't want that, or that he doesn't appreciate it, right? There's nothing to argue with. He doesn't have to honor it, but it's a very different experience than you shouldn't do it this way. And
Yeah.
if I could even extract that out, most people communicate to control, right? They're trying to control other people, the outcome of, what feelings people feel or don't feel. What Jesse is describing is communicating to reveal. Here's my experience. I'm just in real time. Oh, when you said that, I felt angry or scared, and I don't like being spoken to that way, and I don't want to move out. And Jesse also modeled conscious listening, right? Oh, I hear you guys are upset. I hear you're frustrated. Wow, you lost $500,000. Yeah, you're frustrating, and I want to help. So
I think that the Andrew, you love this story, and again, all of this is thanks to Dave. Dave's a great teacher, and I'm a great student. By the way, I'm a top student. But the using unarguable language in my marriage reduced conflict by 80%. And the best example I always tell everyone is, it's Thursday afternoon, we're talking about the weekend, and I go, oh, we should go to Andrew's party. D, we should go to Andrew's party. No, we shouldn't. We have too much stuff going on that day, and Andrew didn't come to our party last time, and it's 45 minutes away. No, but I'm going to know a lot of people there, and we're both going back and forth on the should question.
who's right? Who's right?
Who's right about whether or
Yeah.
not we should go to the party? That's what the discussion becomes about, because arguable language is used. The flip of it is like, I'd really like to go to Andrew's party this weekend. I'd like. Oh, okay. It's a little busy that day, but okay. Like, I think maybe I can take the kids, or I'll go to the gym at this time. Like, all of a sudden we're working together to figure out how we can go do the thing I'd like to do, or I'd like to do these 3 things, and she's like, I'd like to do these 3 things. Awesome. Let's work together to figure out how we can get that done. So no one can, again, I always give this example. She couldn't say, no, you wouldn't like to go there. She can say, no, we shouldn't. Or, Jesse, you wouldn't like to do that. Well, she's not going to, that's impossible to argue what I would like to do this weekend. And so it's a tiny little tactic, but man, it is a total game changer. By the way, for me at least, not only for people around me, but for my brain also, because I'm less dug in. When I think we should go, then I start to go down the right path mentally, versus when I say I'd like, I'm like, this is what I want to do, but I'm not holding it really tightly.
The teacher in me wants to highlight the 4 categories of speaking unarguably. So there's the facts, right? Like what actually occurred, the stories or thoughts that you make up or have about the facts, your feelings, and then your wants. And Jesse is specifically pointing to wants. So facts, thoughts, feelings, wants. And I think of that as a menu of things you could communicate unarguably. Oh, when I'll use your marriage example. Oh, honey, when you told me that you don't want me to go on this trip, I felt sad. And I make up a story that you're trying to limit me from doing the things I want to do selfishly. I really want to go. Right? That might still be a tense conversation, but it's a very different conversation than you shouldn't tell me what to do. You don't care about me. You're selfish, right? That's just going to lead to argument.
I have this memory of Jesse's birthday when we were out in a park, beautiful park in St. Louis. I didn't know that St. Louis looked like this. Jesse had said something, and I thought you were going to disagree with him, Dave. And instead what you did was you go, and I literally remember you taking a breath and you go, yes, and then you said the thing. And
That is how Dave disagrees with people.
Yes. And so here's the thing. It felt a little manufactured, like manufactured support as a way of not irritating the person instead of saying what's on your mind. And is a lot of this therapy stuff really a way of manufacturing language so that you can dance around what you really want to say?
Well, can I take a stab at that one, Dave?
Sure. And then I have a few thoughts as well.
So the first couple of years of doing this conscious leadership stuff, my wife would be like, "You sound like a robot." And to be fair, in her better moments, she'd be like, "Well, at least you're talking about feelings." Because prior to that, I didn't even fucking talk about feelings. I didn't know what I was feeling other than maybe anger, right? I didn't even know I had a feeling other than anger. And what Dave would say to me, and I think what you learn, there's two things I think that this just hit me, Andrew. One is like, look, to learn how to play tennis, you got to manufacture the strokes. Like in the beginning, it's not normal. Like I don't know how to hit that thing. I gotta practice that thing, right? But then the second thing and as I've gotten more mature in it, and I think Dave told me this would happen, is like I don't use the language as often because my heart, like you can use the language and be totally frustrated and below the line, right? And mad, and you can say and you're an asshole, like. The language doesn't work if it gets weaponized or if your heart isn't truly there. The flip of it is you could say should, and if your heart is in the right place, you can say should, and that's not the end of the world either. You might not say it, but you could. And so I think what happens is it's kind of like you learn how to do it, and it does feel a little. I think it can feel manufactured at times, and at times people do weaponize it and use it that way. But it's sort of part of the learning process, I would say. And it doesn't replace what's in your heart. The language can't change. If you're actually disagreeing and you say yes and, then it's not real.
I have so many thoughts. One is, I like your point, Jesse, that it's scaffolding or training wheels. Like there is, by the way, my wife also hated for many years, like, oh my God, just be my husband. Like stop trying to coach me when I would use language, specifically from conscious leadership. So need to be mindful of how you practice and create containers and context for practicing. Like when I said to her, I'm practicing this new thing. I'm going to sound weird and clumsy. Is that okay? And she gives me permission or we have an agreement around it. Then it's not so weird when I do it. I love, Jesse, your point that the way you put it, where you're coming from, where your heart is matters more than the language. So even speaking unarguably, I could say, the story I make up is you're an asshole and you don't care about me. It's obvious that I'm attached to being right about that story, even though mechanically I'm naming that it's a story. So it's the attachment to being right in that example, that's the essence rather than the mechanics of the language. And, I suspect we'll dig more into conscious leadership and above and below the line, but the really simple version is you're either in a state of presence or in a state of threat. And when we're in a state of threat, we just tend to want to be right and get defensive and get reactive. And so that is the essence of at least the conscious leadership work. and, the work that I spend a lot of my attention on with clients. And sometimes using the training wheels or the scaffolding can help you shift, right? Even just by saying it this new way, it's like a pattern interrupt, because your default way is to be in threat and be in ego and get reactive. So even just hearing yourself say the words, well, my story is, it's like, oh, you're triggering yourself. This might just be a story. I might not be right about it. So those are a few
It works
thoughts.
well for me. Like language shapes my reality and back and forth, and so it's been really helpful for me. Um, and I think Andrew, I think again, if it's disingenuous, I don't think Dave was being disingenuous in that moment. He was saying yes, he was agreeing, and he wanted to make some other point. But I think you can disagree. Like it's not to say you shouldn't disagree.
Agreed.
Like
I agree. It's
you,
totally okay to disagree. And I'm going to parlay this to a point I wanted to make earlier, which is one of the things I love, Jesse, about the example you gave with the landlord is love can be fierce and strong. And a lot of people hear the word love and they think, oh, I have to be soft and nurturing. And
That's
like
what I hear.
Jesse's saying, I don't appreciate being spoken of that way, is him coming from love, right? He's standing for his truth. Or that's not okay with me. Or, I use examples sometimes. If my kid's about to walk into, a street and doesn't see a car coming, I'm not like, oh, honey, maybe you want to, I'm like, stop. Right. So, and Jesse mentioned anger. There's a lot of, I think, misunderstanding around anger, because most people's experience of anger is that like reactive, violent anger. But anger, I think all emotions, the way I think of it is like, or love through a prism. Anger is part of love, right? Anger is just boundary energy. And I think it's one of the most misunderstood of the emotions. And I have found, even recently, I had a big breakthrough around my ability to feel anger. And I'm able to literally sense more quickly when my wants or needs are not being met and stand for them.
Like what? Give me like a
I got a good one. Here's a story for you.
Yeah.
So Dave and I have been working together for 7 or 8 years, and we're like friends. I mean,
Like
we've blurred the lines as much as you could blur them between coach and person. And he taught me how to ski for 3 days a year ago. And as you both know, I struggle with my calendar and working and getting better. And it's been a problem forever, as long as I can remember. And I woke up one morning and I was like, oh shit, I got something with my wife at 6. There's no way I can't take the day. I was, hey Dave, can we move the time the morning of? And he did this breakthrough with anger, and he was like, I feel angry that like you're asking me to move this or whatever. I forgot what he said, and I was like, oh man, Dave's important to me. And then I was like, well, he's like, why? I'm like, I think I need a better EA, and I need to like address this issue. Like this is a real thing for me. And he was like, well, then will you please address it? Or something like that. He's like, get a better EA. And like, Andrew, in the last week, I've gotten a better EA, and I'm really excited about her. And like, he's like serving me and helping me get my shit together with scheduling. And it was served through anger. And honestly, he's a really like nice guy, and he's not usually an angry dude. And like, even the feedback I've given him is like, sometimes I want him to be tougher on me as a coach. And that actually helped me a lot. And lots of people have told me that, but he's one of the most important people in my life. And for him to feel that way, I'm like, okay, yeah. And to give me a week, and I've got a local EA now, and she's supposed to be the best EA in St. Louis, and here we are. And so his anger really served me.
He's cheering.
It's fierce love. Yeah. I
Okay,
think I said,
right.
oh, did you just find out you had this conflict later today, Jesse? And you were like, no. I was like, well,
I was like, I'm not on top of my calendar, and I don't have good support. And he was like, all right, well, will you fix those 2 problems, please? Like,
yeah. And we have an agreement for you to give me 24 hours notice, and I want you to honor it.
All right. One of the things that Jesse does whenever we start something or build something is he goes, Andrew, what is your DFS, your desired future state? What is it? So I'll ask you both. And then I want to ask you something that comes to mind for me whenever I come up with a DFS. So how about we get Dave first, and then you, Jesse? What's your DFS here, Dave?
Oh,
For the podcast.
For the podcast. I thought you were going to ask me to explain the concept. Uh,
Why don't you do that?
maybe
Just
I'll do
roll off
that, and then I'll.
what
And
is
then
that,
I'll.
and then what is it yours for this?
So DFS just, yeah, Andrew mentioned, stands for desired future state. But the importance of it and where it comes from is shifting from dirty fuel to clean fuel. So I'll go here for a quick second. Most people intuitively sense that tension is a powerful motivator, right? This is back to what we were talking about earlier. So they motivate themselves by creating tension based on lack and fear. And this is our earlier discussion. Lack, not good enough. Things aren't the way they should be. Fear, things might go, terribly. I'm going to end up scared, hungry, and alone if my startup fails. And so I better get myself, back to work. And the alternate to that kind of tension is creative tension, which is generated when you're present to current reality and your desired future state, DFS, at the same time. So that's where this comes from. It's like, oh, can you accept reality as it is now? And then imagine your DFS. And
as a
it's
cool
not,
example for that, like that I always teach when I teach this, Andrew, is JFK going, we are going to put a man on the moon. It's 1969. It's 1960. We haven't even gotten anything off the ground, much less anything else. And what he didn't say was, we're horrible.
We're losing to the Russians.
We're losing to the Russians. It's going to be terrible if we
at
don't
this
figure this
rate, we'll
out.
never make it.
At this rate, we'll never make it. He was like, he gave a desired future state that was inspiring and galvanizing, and he didn't lie about where we were. We've never launched anything. He didn't make it wrong either, which I think, Andrew, you do that. A lot of us do. Oh, where we are now is wrong because we want something in the future. We want a $10 million business, and today we're a $1 million. That's wrong. That's bad. As opposed to, no, how awesome would it be if?
Right. The way I sometimes say it is we sometimes collapse the desired future state into the present and wish we were already there. Like, oh, I have this beautiful vision. I'll talk about myself, for expanding beyond one-on-one coaching and impacting, thousands and millions of people's lives. But I've only done 2 courses that impact like 50 people's lives, outside of my one-on-one. And I could then use my DFS as a weapon to say, oh God, what's wrong with me? Why am I still only at, 50, 100 people when I imagine impacting thousands or millions? The specific thing that JFK said, if I remember correctly, is we will put a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth by the end of the decade. Right? So who will do what by when, right? It was like very clear. And he used declarative language. We may drop into this more later. Most people think of language as, and you alluded to this, Jesse, as a tool to describe reality. And what they miss is that language is also a tool to create reality. And he literally created a different reality in his speaking, right, in that declaration. So that's the power of DFS. So I honestly hadn't thought about it, but I'll think about it now.
I'll throw a couple things out.
Okay.
I think I would love to have millions of listeners, like 1 million listeners, I'll say, in
I
the
had a
next
similar thought
3
coming up.
years. I think having people regularly come up to me and Dave and saying, I thought in order to have a successful business, I had to use fear. And now you guys have shown and taught that I can do it without that. And I can instead tap into something much more powerful and long-term. And that becomes a normal part of the conversation in entrepreneurship. I think that'd be the second thing. I think the third thing would be we have a lot of fun and we meet some cool people.
You like that, Dave?
I love all of that. Yeah, expansive reach, and profound impact. So I would add, I think you alluded to it, Jesse, but I would just clarify, I really want for the people that listen to this to receive the energy and the teachings to kind of open up to them, to let them in, such that it makes a profound difference in their actual everyday experience of life and being a leader and being a founder. That they experience life differently because of something that they got from these conversations.
All right.
And Dave
So
has like conferences with like 10,000 people raving because he's the next Tony Robbins, and there's all these people who are like, Dave Cashin.
yeah,
Have you been
I
to
mean,
a
I'll
Dave
speak to that
Cashin?
for a
Go for
moment.
it.
Thank you, Jesse. I do sometimes. I have recently felt some frustration when I have this thought: if they only knew what they'd actually experience in coming to my event or course, they would have signed up already. So what am I doing wrong that I'm not able to communicate, or that they're not able to believe or understand what's possible? So yeah, to that point, Jesse, I would love for people to just have a real sense of what's possible for them through powerful coaching, teaching, and be able to choose with full understanding and knowledge, to engage in different programs that I or other, great coaches offer, but with a real sense of understanding what's possible. Because I think most people, the real reason they don't sign up is they don't actually believe or even have a sense of how much more is possible, like how much more successful they could be, and how much more fulfilled and alive and joyful and loving, they could be. And so I love the idea of kind of busting some limiting beliefs around what's possible, so that people are like, well, now I know it's possible. Okay, I want that. And then, to be able to avail themselves of all different ways to create those experiences and shifts.
Okay, you both have said what you want. There's a vulnerability in showing that you don't have it, that you're not as big as you'd like to be, Dave, that Jesse, that you just started a podcast when your friends have gotten podcasts to be millions of people subscribing to their YouTube channel. You're just aspiring for 1 million, and this thing will have a number on it on YouTube. It might be 68 views. And it may also completely stop because you're experimenting. Here's the problem with DFS. We keep creating these DFSs for stuff, and a lot of it, we say, okay, it didn't work out. I'm going to close it because it didn't work out from the world, or I have other stuff to do. And you've left this trail of telling your team, like who Brandon is watching us live on Dave's team. He knows what Dave is trying to do. And if he doesn't get there now, how do you not look like a failure to the people around you because you didn't hit the DFS on this thing?
What's wrong with looking like a failure, Andrew?
Because then people don't support you. I've seen the emails that Jesse gets from people because he's left a trail of success behind. They will work with him for free. They will fly to St. Louis, who's in St. Louis? People will fly to be in St. Louis and work with him, right? Yeah, Jesse, exactly. You're pointing to the right thing. And because he's got this success with Ampush, success with these other companies, they want to be around it just to absorb some of it, to work with him so they could learn it. Now, if he has this podcast that doesn't do well, and then let's see he has another DFS for another thing that doesn't go, don't you have the inverse of that where maybe Brandon goes, why am I working with Dave? He's a wannabe Tony Robbins and doesn't have more than 68 viewers on YouTube. And, like all these other stuff. Doesn't that make you feel like I shouldn't take too many DFS shots here? I should just pick one and be quiet until I get closer to it.
I love
have
you,
a couple-
Andrew.
I have a couple on this. I think one thought I'll say is I think some people are wired differently, and it's as a device, it can be helpful or not helpful depending on the individual. Some people like to set things and beat their goals, and that's what motivates them. And other people like to create a stretch and an exciting future. And, there's always that story again about the JFK thing where the janitor's mopping the floor and he goes, well, what are you doing? And he goes, I'm putting a man on the moon. Right. And that's how he related to it. So look, it's a device. And I think if you make it, I think part of what's happening, Andrew, is, I think attachment, you get attached to this thing, and it's a helpful guidepost to go, this is what I want. And by the way, to ensure that we all want the same thing, and that thing is actually, if we accomplish it, it's the thing we want, right? So it would be silly for us to what if we had this conversation and Dave is like, well, I want 10 really devout listeners, and I'm like, I want 1 million listeners, and him and I are so misaligned. So it's an alignment mechanism, it's a motivation mechanism, it's an exciting, it's a tool that we use to make sure we're running in the right direction. So you're not saying I want to go on a diving trip, and I'm saying I want to hike a mountain. Those are two very different DFSs, and we want to get to the same DFS that enables that. And then from there, Bezos has that quote where he goes, stubborn on vision, flexible on the details. And what he means by that is Dave and I still want that DFS regardless. Now, this podcast is details. It's one way of accomplishing that. And there may be other ways to accomplish that, but I don't think our DFS is going to change, meaning broadly in broad strokes. Like Dave wants, he wants to have that impact on people. I want lots of people to know that this exists in the world. And this is one way we're trying to accomplish that.
I'll add to that. Well, first, I just noticed I was really appreciating you, Andrew, for your incisive questions. So thank you.
Thanks.
And there's this paradox around attachment that I want to speak to, which is the less attached you are to an outcome, the easier it is to create. So this is some of the dance. It's like have a clear desired future state, but don't be attached to it. And what creates attachment is the belief or story that your well-being depends on that future coming into being. And
That my well-being depends on that happening, because otherwise Brandon is not going to respect me enough to stick around, and the next person is not going to want to fly to my town to work with me.
I mean, that's a
Okay.
bunch of stories.
Do you know how much shit I failed at, dude? T-shirt businesses, a high school Facebook. Like, you don't even know about them. And it's like an asymmetric thing. You know about the thing that was successful because I've talked about, like, keep going, Dave.
Yeah, that's also true. First, just notice, your mind just making up a bunch of stories about what will happen if you fail in the future. And they're just bullshit. I mean, if you talk to people who've actually failed, first of all, failure is not final, right? That cliche. It's not like, if you're devoted to something, you don't, this is Jesse's point about the details, you don't just stop because this one thing didn't work, right? You're just going to keep trying different things. I often use the metaphor of like a roadblock on a road trip, right? Like you're on a road trip, you go somewhere and you hit a roadblock and you're like, oh, I'm just a loser. I'm never going to get there. Forget it, right? You just
My kids
find
won't
another
believe in
way,
me
right?
anymore.
You reroute. So I like that metaphor because it's sort of how we relate to failure. There was this, I think it was like a sportscaster that said, I can't lose. I either win or I learn. So I think that's a healthy way to relate to failure. But specifically to your question, the paradox and the irony is the less attached you are to the outcome, the easier it is to create. And the problem is you can't fake it, right? Because believe me, I've tried. To be like, no, I'm not attached to that happening. That's just, it's just my preference. But my body can sense it and I'm attached and then I get, scared around it and I'm not showing up as creatively or confidently or with as much energy. So, the state you're operating from is ultimately what determines your results. And the state is affected by your attachment. Right? If you're attached to the outcome, you're not going to be coming from as resourceful and creative and energized a state as when you are attached. So you're less likely to achieve it. So that's,
What was that,
I think,
Dave? There was a
important.
quote, this Ram Dass quote where he says, like, when you get on the train with baggage, like the baggage just makes the trip more difficult and arduous, but it doesn't get you anywhere different. Like you're going to get there anyway. It's just a question of whether you get there and make it hard on yourself or not.
Yeah, I love that.
I feel that.
Often said to clients, like, my guess is you're going to end up successful. You're probably end up selling this company for some number of hundreds of millions of dollars, if not more. So, if you think about the matrix, like you could either stress out, be attached, make it hard, right? Struggle all the way right up to the finish line. Or you could do it with ease and joy and creativity and lightness. Probably you're going to get, the lie is that I need that stress and heaviness and struggle to get there. And maybe that's your point, Jesse, about the baggage. That's just not true.
Yeah. All right. There's a lot more than I want to hear here. I'd like to see this with other entrepreneurs to see other perspectives. I'd like to challenge you both on some of the things that you believe, like in being present. Why should I be present instead of being in my desired future state all the time and just keep working my way towards that? But I do like these conversations because when I challenge you, you're not coming back to me as, oh, this Andrew doesn't really believe, he's being cynical and skeptical, and then you cut me off. We get to have an interesting conversation. In the end, I get a better understanding of how I think and about how you think, and then I get to pick instead of going with high school Andrew who went to Brooklyn Tech and traveled through Manhattan and saw all these rich people and wasn't liked by anybody. And I was determined to be like the people I wanted to be like, and determined to show the people who didn't like me. And so I'm kind of reverting sometimes to the old way instead of picking where I want to go. And I like that you two are picking where you want to go. All right, we'll see how this goes. Brandon, you will either love me and respect me, or I will be complete failure based on how this podcast goes. So please, Brandon, tell your friends. And if you're listening to us, tell a friend or two also.
Andrew, I have one parting thought for you.
Yes.
Which I think I don't know if Dave and I have ever really, I'm sure Dave has told me this, but I've now like triangulated it from my own religion, from like spiritual books, from coaching. And I noticed, Andrew, that you get after yourself for being this way, right? So you meet your frustration, or you meet your fear with like frustration. That's what I noticed. That's a pattern I noticed with you. And having done a lot of this, because you get mad at yourself for it. You're like, why am I like this? Why am I this way? And in all of this work, like, and in all of the stuff I've done, it's like, it's the MLK quote where it's like light, darkness does not get rid of more darkness. Only light can get rid of darkness. And so a lot of the things, what I would tell you is don't worry so much about the negative parts of this, and instead just bring more light into your life. And a lot of this stuff falls away naturally. And you can't actually undo those things. Like that's what I've learned about myself even, is that with more light, they feel more faint. But I still am, look at other people's success and feel like they don't go away, but more light just in some sense blocks them out, or like it overdoes them. So for you also, just think about bringing more light in and less, and not trying to
not go, why am I
undo the
angry
dark.
about the work I need to do tomorrow, but what am I excited about instead? Yeah,
I might
am trying.
translate.
Believe it or not, I am trying. All
I
right,
appreciate
gentlemen.
you trying. Hey, I need to add one
Yes.
thing. I want to add one thing. I might translate the word light to acceptance, like radical self-acceptance, which I think, Jesse, is what you're pointing to. But the risk of light is some people start to think, oh, so joy
Positive.
is good
Yeah.
and sadness is bad. Excitement good, fear bad, right? Anger bad, like as if those are dark. Those are not dark. And it's actually the acceptance of all the parts and all the feelings, right? Love is unconditional by its nature. I don't think there's such a thing as conditional love. That's not love. That's manipulation or, some dependence or something else. So to me, the path is about becoming increasingly unconditional, which I think is closer to our true nature. But
This is all really nice,
longer
but you both
conversation.
stepped on my call to action at the end. Like we end it with the call to action. Brandon was about to go check on his friends and tell them to listen, and instead he's like, interesting, Andrew does need to work on this. I wonder how episode 2 ends up. Instead, guys, thank you so much for being on here. Thanks anyone who listened. And please, you're like one of the early listeners if you are listening. So don't email Jesse. You're more likely to get a response from him, but you'll overcrowd his inbox. Email me at my special email address for this. It's a@bootstrapgiants.com, or go find Dave Cashin before he becomes whatever he's about to become here. And he's already known by a lot of the... See, this is a thing that I think that in my world, you're known by a lot of the best CEOs as the CEO coach. And so I wonder how many people go, leave it at that. Who needs the riffraff of the million people? Go for like the dozens of people who already know you. All right, we'll talk about all that and more in the future. Tell your friends. Bye, everyone. I do not hang up on